this story, and I want you to learn about Paton from Paton. But I can tell you you're in for a treat for the next 30 minutes or so. So Paton.
I don't do well with these. My name is Paton Blough, and I want to start with the first word I'm about to say will be the last word I say. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All the law enforcement professionals who have ever been sworn, please raise your hands. And hold them up, hold them up, hold them up, keep them up. Everybody that doesn't have their hands raised, please thank these law enforcement professionals for being here to learn about crisis intervention. Because of you, this conference and you being here, lives are going to be saved all around the country and the world. Now, if you're a mental health professional or a person with lived experience that cares deeply about helping law enforcement understand what it's like to be in crisis or to help somebody in crisis, if you're a mental health professional or a peer support specialist or somebody with lived experience, would you raise your hand? Keep them up. Keep them up. Law enforcement, will you clap for these individuals? I think we got about 50-50 there almost. Can you believe it? We're here today as people that have been arrested, people that love people with mental health. You know what? A lot of the law enforcement here love people with mental health disorders, right? That's why you get involved in CIT, because you have the personal experience. We're all here today to work together for a common goal. And I thank you. So now I get to tell you my story. It's pretty easy I'm a preacher's kid, right? And my dad had to do a different sermon every week. But I get to tell my story. So I kind of get to do the same sermon every week, or the same story every week. So I didn't really prepare a whole lot for today. I just want to tell you my story. And I'd like to give a little background just so you understand. You know, it might be a little boring at first, but trust me, it's not going to be boring by the end. If anybody gets bored, please raise their hand. I'll make sure it doesn't get boring. Sometimes I hit humor, sometimes I don't. It's okay to laugh. We embrace humor as healthy as one of the NAMI 10 pillars of support. So I almost want to tell a joke right now, but it probably wouldn't work, so I'm not going to try. But my story, I like to start it with my dad growing up in Pennsylvania, southwestern Pennsylvania. My grandpa was a coal miner. I have Amish Mennonite background from there. My dad saw SANS at Iwo Jima during the Second World War, and he decided to become a Marine. And he was coming back from the Korean War. He's 85 years old. I'm the youngest of 9. He got saved, and he became a preacher. And he went to this university called Bob Jones University, where he met my mother, who was from Denver, Colorado. She was the Vi Queen in North High, Denver, Colorado. She didn't want to be the homecoming queen because she didn't believe in dancing. And so she met my father at Bob Jones University in Greenville, South Carolina, where I'm from. And in 1959, they got married and went straight to the mission field. And I'm 7 out of the 9 older siblings I have. I'm the youngest. Were born in Japan. And in 1976, very shortly after I was born, my dad decided to go back to the States and took a church in northern New Hampshire. And so my earliest memories in life were Littleton, New Hampshire. My dad was a colorful person. He decided he didn't like what had happened in the education system, so he started a Christian school. He was on national TV when I was 4 years old, arguing with Jesse Jackson over pro-life, pro-choice. He was a very colorful figure. But he always was in control. He was a Marine. How many military are here today? Please raise your hand. Thank you. Please clap. Let me tell you, the men and women in uniform that have served our country, there's no bigger heroes in my mind. And a lot of you become law enforcement professionals, and there's a little bit of a war going on in our streets, right? And our homes. We'll get to that a little bit more later. Back to the story. So my dad, I remember a phone call coming, and I remember my dad being bewildered. And he had to go down to Bob Jones University where a brother of mine was in the hospital. But he wasn't in the hospital for a broken leg. He was in the hospital because he had had his first bipolar manic episode. He was working for UPS at night, and he was unloading trucks, and he was doing a small business repair, and he was a computer science major, very smart, and he had an episode, and he thought that he had top secret information to protect the entire nation, and he needed to tell Ronald Reagan, so he got a brand new Mercedes and brand new clothes as a college student, and was on his way to Washington, D.C. to save the country, and he ran out of gas. And my uncle picked him up, and he ended up in a hospital. My dad had to go get him, and then he ended up in a mental hospital. And I remember him doing some strange things, like riding a horse into the house and spraying my parents with a hose. And the police coming because he was trying to buy some big motorhome because my dad wanted to move to Alaska. And then he would carry me on his shoulders and he would sing songs to me. I loved him. He was different, but I still loved him, and I love him to this day. So now I'm going to fast forward. That was my early experience with bipolar disorder. So now it's 1994. I go to Bob Jones, but I watched my brother go through his episodes my whole life, and I watched my parents deal with it, and it was the number one trauma in my family growing up. All my other siblings got married, had kids, everything's fine, very successful, and Carrie's never been married. But I go to college, and in '98, I get married, and I stay in Greenville, and a different brother showed me the tree business. So I was a criminal justice major, by the way. I wanted to be a cop. And I changed to Bible and then physical education. But I ultimately got married in '98, trying to finish school. But I started a tree company because that's what my oldest brother taught me, and I could make a lot of money doing that. And I built a brand new house, and I had a young son. And it was 2000, right after September 11th. That probably was the trigger for one of my brother's episodes. And he was in Canada, he got kicked out of Canada, he wanted to buy a ferry in Vancouver. It's a crazy story, but he ends up taking a rail all the way to DC, and he's living in Washington, D.C. in a 1980 AMC, trying to overturn the Jones Act. So we're friends with some political people in Alaska, and he's lobbying Senator Begich and Representative Young to overturn the Jones Act. The Jones Act would allow a $1 million ship to be bought that wasn't built in the U.S., so you could go within U.S. ports. That was like, it's like 100-year-old act. So nobody in my family wanted to help him. He was actually started a fire outside of the Pentagon, and he had arrested for that. But I went and found an address. I found a cone that said CTS on an orange cone, and it carries technical services. And I found the owner of that property. He goes into my restaurant and eats. He fixes things for me. So I found him at the old post office where the homeless lived. Do you know where the old post office is today? It's Trump International that he just fixed up. I found him there. I get him back to South Carolina. I'm calling doctors. I'm calling my preacher. I'm trying to get him help. I'm trying to save him. I'm trying to get him, into a mental health facility, but he won't listen. I have a young, family. It started getting crazy one night. And I was like, I want you to get help. I don't want you to get hurt. He was doing a lot of odd things, and I was an adult dealing with him. And so what did I do? I'm physically trying to hold him from leaving my house. I called 911. I was 26 years old. The police came. They were coming down into my cul-de-sac. He gets into that 80 AMC and hits it in reverse, drags me a little bit. The cops see it. Somehow evades the police. And later that night, I bought him a hotel up in North Carolina. And the next morning, writes a report and everything. Next morning, I get a rap on the door, and it's a cop. And the way she was looking at me and everything, I think she thought I was the one that was doing this. But she goes, "Is that your old Mercedes?" I had an old 77 300D Mercedes. And I said, "Yes, it is." And she goes, "Well, it was seen pulling people over yesterday." And I was like, what do you mean? I was like, there's lights on it. And we went, and I discovered that my brother had put strobe lights in the headlights. He was pulling people over. He's the police. Anyway, I told her where he was. They extradited him, he ends up in jail. And for $500, his family could have bailed him out, but did we? No. He was safe there. He should have been in a hospital, he should have been somewhere besides a jail, but he was safe there. So, fast forward, we're gonna get to Kansas City here in a second. 6 weeks later, I started doing the storm cleanup work. I was broke, I was trying to make my bills. You had a bad ice storm here in Kansas City. In February 5th, 2002, I let off to Kansas City, 900 miles from Greenville, and I had a bucket truck and a chipper and all these things to do tree work. And I started having an emotional experience. I read stuff in the Bible that looked different. I went without sleep. I remember the hotel, I just passed it on the way here in Tennessee, that I was crying on the bathroom floor emotionally, thinking maybe God was really saving me for the first time or whatever. I get out here and I wanted to not even make money, I wanted to go work for the poor. I thought my church back home was going to bring in the millennial kingdom. I started thinking the scripture was written just for me to tell the world, and I was the only one that could interpret it. And it got to the level where I'm like, I'm the Messiah. Or I'm the Holy Ghost, the Comforter will come, who will prove the world of sin and righteousness of judgment. No. I'm the Antichrist, I have pride, I couldn't be God. Have you guys heard of godlike invincibility? Have you heard of it? Who's heard of it? Godlike invincibility, mania? Nobody's raising their hand. You've never heard of it? You've heard of it. Who's an officer that's heard of it? Let me tell you. I'm God. The part of my brain that assesses risk is no longer working. I don't care about your gun or your taser. I have the power of God rolling through me. It's quiet in here. So I call my father. I'm at the Mayor Suites Hotel over in Overland Park. You know where that is, anybody? I'm in Overland Park, and I'm calling my dad in Alaska, and I'm explaining to him how I'm Jesus, or God. And my Baptist father, I thought he'd be happy about that. Thank you. It is. So, he was real quiet. He's in Alaska. I'm in the Mayor Suites Hotel in Overland Park. I'm cleaning up the Prairie Village. I got a job to clean up Paradise Campground, a Blue Ridge, Blue Field over here, just east of Kansas City. And he said, "You're in a high emotional state. You sound like Harry. You need to go home." So I said, "Okay." I walked out of the Mayor Suites Hotel. I drove to the airport. I bought a ticket at the counter with cash. I had earbuds in me, and I walked through security right after September 11th, acting strange. I got onto the plane. I thought the stewardess was an angel. I landed in Greenville. My wife, didn't know what to do. That same preacher, those same doctors came to see me the next day. They wouldn't let me go to church. And I said, but this is it. We're entering the millennial kingdom. And I got put on that miracle drug called Zyprexa. And it calmed me down. A week later, I came back to Kansas City, finished my job, stayed out here a couple months. And I struggled with it. And my pastor disagreed with the doctor in my church who recommended the medications. And he said, "You don't need medications. You need to handle yourself spiritually, and you'll be fine." So I was like, okay. I went off the drugs. 6 months later, I'm going to be a better Christian. I'm going to pray more. 6 months later, I had episode number 2. This time I ruined my marriage. My wife was pregnant. And I remember sitting on my couch and going into the closet. I had a CWP. I had a Springfield 1911 Armory, beaver tail, magna ported, compact. And I usually get into this a little bit more, but I've gotten a lot more sensitive just during this conference about suicide. I'm not going to describe to you exactly how I felt like I usually do. Let's just put it this way. It felt really good to hold it to my head. And I consider myself a suicide survivor. I was sitting in that house. I remember just sitting there, just crying. My wife was gone. She went to Michigan. She was pregnant. She had my 2-year-old son. And I remember listening to the refrigerator run. Because it was quiet. And then I remember walking into a Barnes & Noble somehow after my brother in the tree service gave me a lot of encouragement. And I remember seeing 10 boxes, Bipolar Survivor Guide it was called, and I checked all 10 boxes. And then I knew for the first time I wasn't alone. I knew that there's 4 million people out there with bipolar type 1 disorder. And that these government conspiracy theories, I also had government conspiracy theories that are in that first episode, and especially during the second episode, and I found out that that was normal. I found out that invincibility and paranoia was normal for people with that disorder. So I went and got the best doctor in town, I got on lithium, and I was doing fine. Everything except my marriage was recovering. And 2.5 years later, I built my business, I'd gone to Virginia, I'd worked in different places, and I went down, you guys remember Katrina. And Katrina hit, and I went down, I took my business down there, I fought for a job, I landed with a partner, a side partner, I landed a $2.6 million job to clean up Meridian, Mississippi, a couple days after Katrina hit. And I remember I was excited. This time it wasn't about the Bible exciting me, it was exciting me about feeling like I was on top of the world. I had already bought a big house and land, and had about 9 guys working for me, and I was on top of the world, and I was getting ready to do this job and clean up this city. And then I was taking my lithium, it was on the shelf, I was taking my meds. But what happened was I started finding out about fraud and corruption in that town. And instead of just doing what most people do, is just be quiet about it and go about their business, I decided to get noisy about it. And I went and found an attorney, and I told him what I knew, and he was like going along with me, and then he goes, it gets higher and higher, and I start naming people in that city, and he goes, no, I go to church with him. He goes, you need to go down to the police station. So, my first 2 episodes, once again, didn't involve police or hospitals, but maybe this is the next time I get involved in the police in my life other than speeding tickets. And I go down, he takes me down, I go to the police station, and I wait. I'm starting to have an episode. I want to feel powerful. I want to feel in control. I want to feel important. I had to sit there and wait for a youth resource officer who listened to my story and had the look you have right now. Quite frankly, it was a look like that. And I was like, well, what should we do? And I was like, should we go to the FBI? And he's like, I don't know. I just think you need to. I was like, am I safe in this town? I don't know, maybe you ought to leave town. I took that as a threat from a law enforcement officer in my life. I went and got my Crown Vic. I had a Crown Vic rented. I went to the nearest Walmart and bought a 12-gauge shotgun and loaded it with buckshot. I went out, the manager walked me out, I put the butt in the seat, and I had the barrel on the dash. The only other thing in the car was a laptop where I'd been writing emails to General Chertoff, the head of Homeland Security, about the fraud I knew. I'm going up I-20. I pass a cop going 5 over the speed limit, and I'm like, okay, that's just normal, whatever. I don't want to act freaked out. And he goes and hits his blue lights. Well, let me back up just a little bit. In the 20 minutes before that, I'm like calling Lieutenant Governor of Alaska. I'm calling my buddy in Michigan to help fly his Gulfstream to get me out of the South. And I'm in the middle of the good old boys. I had gotten into race relations in that town and stuff like that. It was very, very bizarre. You can read about the details in my book when it comes out someday. And someday. It's being written right now. This week has been amazing. I don't know if there was 3 or 4 cars behind me, but I know one came in front of me, and my mind's racing, and it's a different color than the color I passed, so I'm like, okay, I'm safe now. The shotgun I bought, when that officer first went by me and put his blue lights on, I figured if I pulled over, I was going to have to kill him, and nobody would believe me. And so I put my hands in the air at 130 miles an hour, drove with my knee to a stop behind that car. When the guns were on the window, I took this right hand right here and slowly unlocked the door. The last thing I remember was I didn't even put it in park, and the car drifted in front of me and hit the patrol car. I think I was arrested for the first time in my life. I was 29 years old. I was put in the Birmingham jail I was incarcerated for the first time in my life. The faucet was following me around, and 45 slugs were going to come out. I was waging nuclear war with China. The guy in the chow line was giving me the signals from George Bush. 3 nuclear bombs in the air, let's launch 5. Where are they? Are they in Alaska? Are they in Canada? Are they in Hawaii? Let's do it directional, from all over the world toward China. Can we put them in the ocean without detonating them? Yes. George Bush was obeying me. Reese Witherspoon was one of my guards undercover. The bed didn't have a mattress, and I was sleeping on it sideways because the 6 holes were going to come up and kill me. The whole jail might blow up. I put soap in my ears. I take my clothes off. I rub myself with grits. You want to hear more? Have you seen this? Have you seen people take their clothes off? It doesn't matter. I end up in the University of Alabama C6 South Hospital. I have charge nurses tackling me and strapping me to beds and putting needles up my ass. I remember seeing the psychiatrist goes, "You're sick. You're so sick." My parents picked me up a month later. They went in and paid my bond. I go back to South Carolina. My partner never came and visited me. He screwed me out of every dime. I'm sitting in my house again with a gun to my head again. I was on Risperdal, wanted to die again. I went back to that jail. The court, to face my reckless endangerment charge and my speeding charge, and the cop didn't show up. That was bad, because it just meant more conspiracy theory. I wanted to tell the judge what happened. I didn't get my laptop back. Worse, had all my information in it. It's at the tow company. Tow company's the cops got it. Nope, no laptop. So I go into court. They give me off a $150 fine or something. I go back home. The next 3 years of my life, 6 arrests. 3 went violent. 3 went good. 6 hospitalizations. Some of them were mania, and the last one was I actually asked to go before I was able to ward it off. So, the difference in those arrests were not the way I was acting, whether they went well or not. The difference was how the officer treated me. So I'm going to tell you, we played one in Virginia Beach. I have some audio of it in my workshop. We're not going to talk about that one. I'm going to talk about the night after I spent 6 months in the Virginia Beach. I came back to South Carolina. I got a felony for spitting on an intake officer in Virginia, and I got man up right away. And I went into another episode. And I went into a convenience store to demand to use the phone, and I was mad because I couldn't get any cash out to go party. And the description went out and everything. They called it off. But the officer, who's now my friend, he's not here today, his name's Burt Baines, saw my description. He said, better check me out. So he was checking me out, and I was cursing him, I was assaulting him, but anything I could do to feel powerful. When you can make an authority figure obey, get on your knees. You don't know who you're talking to. Is this illegal? Can I unbuckle my belt right now? Oh, I'm sorry, I don't want to break any laws, officer. He batons me, pepper sprays me, gets me into an ambulance. A different officer takes over. I get taken to the jail. This is my truth, guys. I got taken to the hospital. I'm in the hospital. I remember being in a gurney. I remember actually cursing profanities at African American people in the way of slurs because I thought they were white people in makeup. Delusions get half the world large. You start thinking that maybe people you're dealing with are 200-year-old Nazis or the Illuminati, or you're not a Greenville police officer, you're an FBI or CIA. Everything becomes like that. They're taking me out of the hospital and they're going to put me into a squad car. I thought the entire campus was on a turret trying to confuse me geographically. I remember thinking the squad car was nobody in it, so they're going to blow it up. I have leg cuffs and handcuffs on. I kicked my shoes off. They put me in the car and they go to throw my shoes in. I thought they had stuck plastic explosives in them. I was fighting for my life. I got dry stun tased with leg cuffs and handcuffs on. If I pulled my shirt off, you could see the scars in the back of the police car. 7 officers got me to jail. A little later on, 3 days later, I still wasn't receiving my meds. But during that time, a jail intake nurse came to me and I was verbally assaulting her, she was part of the problem. She was one of the evil ones. Just because you're a nurse and you don't have a uniform on doesn't mean you're part of the evil. And I would sing. I would sing for hours. I would cite poetry. You know, let me stop there for a minute. Bipolar is not all bad. We get creative. We can write things. We can do things. Do you know some people who have bipolar? Paton, Winston Churchill. My favorite president, Theodore Roosevelt. I named my company Bull Moose Tree Company after the Bull Moose Park. Kurt Cobain, Demi Lovato. Who else? I choose to celebrate the good parts of this disorder as well as the bad. Now I'm way off track. Way off track. Where was I? Sing. I was cursing her. Listen, I was a preacher's kid, but I fished for Italians in Alaska and on fishing boats, and I've seen it all. I can hear it all. I can out-cuss anyone. Does anybody want to come challenge me? You want to cuss? Come on, raise your hand. I'm cursing at a nice lady, a nurse. She ignored it. And she said, I heard you sing. John. I've gone by Paton since birth, but my first name is John. John, I heard you sing. You have a nice voice. You like to sing? Could you sing for me? Your cheating heart will make you weep. You'll try to sleep, but sleep won't come the whole night through. Your cheating heart will tell on you. When the tears come down, come on, sing it, like the falling rain, we'll toss around and call my name. You'll walk the floor in the jail cell the way I do. Your cheating heart will tell on you. Yeehaw! Thank you. So, that connects me. That connects me to my father and my coal mining father, playing finals, playing pool once on the afternoons when I was a 4-year-old kid. Connect with people. So, my time's probably way long gone. I'm almost done, Darren. Wow, it's way over. Give me 5 more minutes, I can wrap this up. There's this officer one night, 6 months after the tasing. I'm in an Applebee's. This officer right here. I'm at an Applebee's and I'm accusing 2 people of being undercover and I'm causing a scene. They call the police. I'm walking out and I see the squad cars coming. I'm feeling all the PTSD, all the everything. And I probably went right in on him. I don't remember every detail, but I remember this. He actually said, don't look at me. Don't look at my badge. He waited for my brother to come 20 minutes away to bring me medications. We always think the government's trying to set us up. So he has some water. My brother's sitting there. I'm sitting in the car. He's letting me have my feet outside the side, you know? And put my cuffs on the front, if I remember correctly, or maybe I don't even remember if I had cuffs on, to be honest with you. But I was sitting in the car, I think I had cuffs on. It's like, here's some water. But, oh, they're going to put cocaine in there, they're going to set me up when I get to jail. Hey, dude, do you want me to take a sip? I actually needed that. Connected with me, he knew people I knew. He has told me since that he would have liked to take me to a restoration center, not jail, or not an ER. But I mean, because I'd spent 6 months in Virginia Beach jail, I got behind my child support and I had a warrant on me. So he had to take me to jail that night. I got the story backwards. The nurse was a couple days later, but 3 days later after not receiving my meds, I actually received my second felony for threatening the sheriff of my county. And I described how I was going to do it to another officer. I have a felony in South Carolina for threatening the life of a public official, but guess what? I started training as officers and we had cigars together. How about that? I usually don't tell that. It's usually too sensitive. He's retired now, but he's a good man. So he this officer did it all right, and then I can't tell about all my advocacy like I thought I was gonna, because time's up. But at one point I'm like talking to Capitol Hill about this man, and I was like, this guy did it right, and this is how he did it. Oh, for the stepping up and to reduce the number of mentally ill behind bars, I was actually on Capitol Hill talking about that, and I'd like him to stand right now. Please, thank you. Talk to you about some legislation that Captain Owens here from GPD, can you raise your hand, Captain Owens? We had a tragedy in our community, and that's where I got involved. A guy got tased. And because of that tasing, we had like 7 or 8 officers trained. That caused a lot of awareness in our community, and I sat down with our chief and a senator and stuff like that. And I went, NAMI had been giving me a lot of support, and I went to my first ever training to tell those stories. And when I told those stories of arrest gone well and arrest gone bad, Mike was sitting back there. And we actually embraced in front of all those officers. When I saw his hand raised, I was like, that the Applebee's? And I was like, yep, I knew that face. I haven't seen him in 4 years. So you can't make this stuff up. But then since then, Greenville City Police Department has really gotten on fire for CIT. And Captain Owens and I actually helped pass some legislation. This front page came from one time when a judiciary chairman, senator, house member said, oh, your bill's not going to get heard, or his secretary told me that. And I said, watch me. A little crazy? I'm going to climb a mountain every day. And guess what? By the time this article was written, after I climbed 2,000 feet every day in a row for awareness for the bill that I had started, he said, oh, I think it'll get a hearing. And then a few weeks later, oh, block, what do I hit? There it is. I wanted a signing from the governor. And I was like, I'll just get all advocates around and sign. She sent me the pen, Nikki Haley, that says, Mr. Blough, thank you for your efforts on the Mental Health Court Program Act. Please accept this pen for my thanks, Nikki. That bill led to another bill, which last May was signed with the help of Captain Owens, that says part of the ongoing 40-hour recertification process to keep your law enforcement accreditation up, some of that's going to be not forcing CIT certification, but some of that's going to be the discipline of crisis intervention. So it's a little bit broad, but we're really proud that we got a law in South Carolina passed. Maybe it's a little bit of a leadership bill, I'm not sure, that now all law enforcement officers in South Carolina are going to be part of this type of thing for the pursuit of future. Peer support. I just want to park here for a second. I think it's a lot of the future. I did the In Your Own Voice NAMI training the other day, about 9 months ago, and I did my first ever presentation in the very jail, that I told you the story about with the nurse. And I'd been in the shoe in that jail. I could tell you stories all day about making ropes and working myself around that jail and everything. But I went back to that jail and I talked to 10 inmates about their future and what they could do and how they could use their story to help others. And I was talking to my jail, in my community. I was talking to the head of mental health and I said, what's the follow-up plan? They try to point in the right direction. This is a conversation I had not long ago. I said, she goes, you know what, sometimes they get out at 2 in the morning and when I get here to work, they're gone. That's not okay. The T in team is everything. It's not just training, right? Everything. That may be some peer support specialists picking them up from jail, taking them to McDonald's, buying them some cigarettes, taking them to a place where they can sleep on a nice, clean bed. Within days, having a job interview for them. What's wrong with this country? I guess we're crazy. I'm a certified peer support specialist. Why don't we have it within our system? We have no business. This recidivism rate is no business. We have no business having 5% of the world population and 25% of the world's prison population. We had no business losing going from almost 600,000 hospital beds down to 40-some thousand hospital beds. And now you have to pick up the pieces. We have no business, I'm going to get political for a second, fighting all these foreign wars and not taking care of our veterans when they come back. And 250,000 of them are in the prison system. We have no business doing that. So I got nothing to lose up here. You're experiencing a little bit of mental illness right now. I didn't know what I was going to say today. I didn't even plan. I had a few PowerPoints, and that was it. Let's get to the next 30 years. It's not about me. It's not about Major Ivy or Sam Cochran. It's not about any individual. The next 30 years lies right here at each and every table. Go back to your communities and fight. Fight for training. Fight for funding. Fight for mental health courts. Fight for veterans courts. Fight for homeless courts. Fight to fund the nonprofits that supply housing and drug addiction counseling. Fight for peer support. Let's pass national legislation that fixes a lot of this. Not some Band-Aid for some politician getting line in his pockets. I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. Okay, this is it. You do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, you do better. Do you know anything about Maya Angelou? You know what she overcame? You know what she overcame? You know she couldn't speak for 5 years because of her abuse? That's my favorite quote outside of Scripture. I was on my way to Capitol Hill, and I was like, God, I'd already given my script. I said, give me something. I ended up making a bracelet out of it. It's green and orange, the color of mental health awareness, and the color of orange is somebody that's been locked up because of their mental illness or shame. And on the inside of my bracelet, the verse was given to me, and I went on Capitol Hill and I was telling about Mike Ford and I was telling about CIT and mental health courts, and I had my 4 or 5 minutes speaking into the cameras on Capitol Hill, and that verse that came to me, I was like, I got nothing to lose. So I went off script and I ended it with, you got to speak up and judge fairly and defend the rights that bore me. Robert's there. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, now you can see why I wanted Peyton to close the conference. The man is a little bit passionate, when you say. Yeah. And the most important thing that I love to hear at it is that it's not just one person, there's not just one person. That's true. But all it takes is just that one person. And that one person showed this man the kindness and the compassion that he needed at that time. And now how many lives as he touched himself, and how many lives are you going to touch because of him? And so that's all it takes is that one person, but acting as a team, like Peyton says. So I would love to present Peyton with this small token of our appreciation, but you mean much more than this.